They thought I was just an expensive burden. But the moment my father whispered about wasted money, the stage lights blazed to life, and the entire world, along with my family, discovered the truth I'd been hiding. For 24 years, they'd dismissed me as the failure, the disappointment, the one who'd never amount to anything. Today, at my graduation, they'd learn exactly how wrong they were. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't violence, it's watching those who underestimated you realize they'd been blind all along. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I learned early that love in my family was conditional, and I never met the conditions. Growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, our modest two-story house on Maple Street felt more like a shrine to my older brother Ethan than a home. Every wall seemed to whisper his name. His high school football trophies cluttered the mantelpiece. His honor roll certificates from sophomore year still hung in the hallway, and his acceptance letter to Case Western's pre-law program remained magneted to the refrigerator long after he'd dropped out junior year. I was 8 when I first understood I was the wrong child. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I'd just bounded through the front door, my small hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. I'd won the school science fair with my project on plant photosynthesis, beating out 5th graders with my 3rd grade experiment. The blue ribbon felt heavy in my backpack, and I couldn't wait to see Dad's face light up the way it did whenever Ethan scored a touchdown. Dad, Mom, I won," I called, bursting into the living room where they sat watching the evening news. Dad barely glanced up from his recliner. "Won what, Rachel?" "The science fair, Mrs. Peterson said my project was the best she'd seen in 10 years, and—" "That's nice, honey," Mom interrupted, not looking away from the television. "Can you go set the table? Dinner's almost ready?" But Ethan was sprawled across the couch, 20 years old and still living at home after flunking out of college. He smirked. "Let me guess, another participation trophy." "No, it's first place. Look." I held up the blue ribbon, my 8-year-old heart hammering with hope. Ethan laughed, a sound that would haunt me for years. "Rachel, everyone gets ribbons at elementary school science fairs. It's not real." Dad finally turned his attention to me, his expression tired. "Ethan's right, sweetheart. Wait until you're in high school to get excited about these things." I stood there in my grass-stained jeans and oversized sweater, holding my ribbon like a wilted flower. The blue silk suddenly felt cheap in my fingers. That night, I carefully placed it in my desk drawer, beneath my homework and broken crayons. I never showed them another award again. The pattern continued through middle school. When I made honor roll 6 semesters in a row, Dad would grunt his approval and immediately ask if I'd reminded Ethan about his community college enrollment deadline. When I placed second in the regional math competition, Mom worried aloud about the gas money for the drive. When I got accepted into the advanced biology track in high school, they asked how much the lab fees would cost. Everything was about money. Everything was about burden. "Rachel's expensive," I'd overhear Mom saying on phone calls with my aunt. All these academic programs, these competitions. Ethan was so much easier, just football and friends. They never mentioned that Ethan's easier path had cost them $20,000 in student loans before he dropped out. They never talked about the credit card bills from his fraternity parties or the bail money from his DUI. Somehow, my library books and science camp applications were the real financial drain. By 16, I'd learned to make myself small. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every work-study program available. I babysat the neighbors' kids on weekends and tutored struggling classmates for $5 an hour. When I needed new clothes, I shopped at Goodwill and told my parents I'd found a great sale at the mall. The night I got my SAT scores, 1560 out of 1600, I didn't even go downstairs to share the news. Instead, I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at the numbers on my phone screen, feeling proud and hollow at the same time. Through my thin walls, I could hear Dad on the phone with his brother, bragging about Ethan's new job at the auto parts store. "He's really turning his life around," Dad said, "finally showing some responsibility." Ethan was 24, making $9 an hour, and still asking Mom for grocery money. but he was the success story. I was just the expensive mistake who kept winning things nobody cared about. That night, lying in my narrow twin bed, staring at the ceiling with its familiar water stain, I made a promise to myself. Someday, they would care. Someday, they would see exactly what they'd dismissed. Someday, the whole world would know what Rachel Monroe was really worth. I just didn't know that someday would come with a microphone, stage lights, and a truth so bright it would blind them all. College hit me like a slap of cold reality wrapped in false hope. Ohio State University sprawled before me like a concrete promise red brick buildings, manicured quads, and thousands of students who looked like they belonged there. I clutched my partial scholarship letter like a life preserver, knowing it covered 60% of tuition but left me drowning in the rest. Well, we'll have to cover what the scholarship doesn't, Dad had said, his voice carrying the weight of martyrdom. I guess that's what parents do, even when it hurts. Mom nodded solemnly. We'll make it work. Rachel, somehow. They made it sound like they were donating a kidney instead of paying for their daughter's education. Meanwhile, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone while eating cereal at 2:30 in the afternoon, his community college textbooks gathering dust on the counter. Nobody mentioned that his failed academic career had already cost them more than my entire 4-year degree would. My dorm room was a shoebox I shared with a girl named Madison whose parents had bought her a mini fridge, a coffee machine, and enough designer clothes to stock a boutique. She talked about spring break in Cancun while I calculated whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries that month. The answer was usually no. By October, I was working 3 jobs, Monday through Wednesday. I waited tables at Tony's Diner, a greasy spoon near campus where truckers and late-night students came for coffee that could strip paint. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a 60-year-old woman with kind eyes and hands like leather who never asked why I picked up every available shift. You remind me of myself at your age, she'd say, sliding an extra slice of pie my way during slow nights. Hungry, not for food for more. Thursday and Friday afternoons. I worked as a teaching assistant for Dr. Rodriguez's Introduction to Biology course, $20 an hour to grade freshman lab reports and explain basic cellular respiration to hungover 19-year-olds who'd rather be anywhere else. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was teaching students whose parents paid their full tuition without blinking. Weekends belonged to the research lab. Dr. Sarah Mitchell ran the neurobiology lab like a military operation, all precision and purpose. She was 45, brilliant, and had no patience for students who treated research like an easy A. When I'd first approached her about joining her team, she'd looked me up and down with sharp gray eyes. "This isn't academic daycare," she'd said. "I need someone who understands that science is work, real work." "I understand work," I'd replied, thinking of my calloused hands and the permanent smell of coffee that clung to my clothes. She'd studied me for a long moment. "We'll see." That was 18 months ago. Now I spent Saturday and Sunday mornings in the lab, running experiments on synaptic plasticity in mouse brain tissue. The work was meticulous, demanding, and absolutely fascinating. While my classmates nursed hangovers and scrolled through social media, I peered through microscopes and recorded data that might someday help treat Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Mitchell paid me $15 an hour, barely anything, but enough to cover ramen noodles and bus fare. The family group chat was my daily dose of poison. Family chat, the Monroes. Mom. Tuesday, 3:15 p.m. Ethan got Employee of the Month again. So proud. That Tuesday, 3:18 p.m. That's my boy. Hard work pays off. Ethan. Tuesday, 4:22 p.m. Thanks, guys. Boss says I might get promoted to assistant manager soon. Mom. Tuesday, 4:25 p.m. We should celebrate dinner at Olive Garden this weekend. Dad. Tuesday, 4:26 p.m. Absolutely. Our treat. I stared at my phone screen, sitting in the campus library between my shift at Tony's and my evening study session. Employee of the month at an auto parts store. They were planning a celebration dinner that would cost more than I spent on food in 2 weeks. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Congratulations felt hollow. What about my Dean's List achievement last semester? Felt pathetic. I'm working 3 jobs to pay for an education you think is worthless. Felt too honest. Instead, I sent, "That's great, Ethan." Nobody responded. The monthly tuition discussions were even worse. Every few weeks, Dad would call with the tone of a man carrying the world's heaviest cross. "Rachel, honey, we got the bill for next semester." "I know. Dad, I've been applying for more scholarships." It's a lot of money. Your mother and I are really stretching here." I'd bite my tongue, remembering the Facebook photos Mom posted of their weekend trips to Cedar Point, their new patio furniture, Dad's upgraded truck. But Ethan lived at home rent-free, eating their groceries and using their Netflix password while contributing maybe $200 a month to household expenses. "I'm working as much as I can," I'd say. "We know, sweetheart. We're proud of you for that. It's just hard. You know Ethan's finally getting his life together, and here we are still paying for school." The implication hung in the air like smog. Ethan was the investment that had paid off. I was the money pit that kept demanding more. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was how their resentment fueled me. Every shift at Tony's, every late night in the lab, every rejection letter from scholarship committees only made me more determined. While they saw an expensive burden, I was building something they couldn't imagine. My grades were perfect. My research was groundbreaking. My professors whispered about graduate school opportunities that would make their heads spin. But I kept quiet, saving every achievement like ammunition for a war they didn't know we were fighting. Late at night, when my roommate was out partying and I was alone with my textbooks and instant coffee, I'd sometimes wonder what it would feel like to have parents who asked about my day, who bragged about my accomplishments, who saw my potential instead of just my price tag. Then I'd remember that someday. Very soon. None of that would matter. Because someday, the whole world would see what Rachel Monroe was worth. And my family would finally understand the magnitude of their mistake. Graduation day arrived like a storm I'd been watching build on the horizon for 4 years. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in my cramped studio apartment, a glorified closet I'd moved into junior year when dorm costs became unbearable. The morning light filtered through my single window, illuminating the water stains on the ceiling and the stack of biology textbooks that served as my nightstand. My cap and gown hung on the back of my door like a black ghost, waiting. The apartment was silent except for the hum of my ancient refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic starting to build on High Street. I'd lived alone for 2 years now, and the quiet had become my companion. No roommate to worry about, no family dropping by unannounced, no one to witness the moments when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. I made coffee with the cheap instant stuff that tasted like burnt water and sat on my futon, staring at my phone. The family group chat had been buzzing since yesterday. Family chat, the Monroes. Mom. Friday, 7:45 p. Can't believe our baby is graduating tomorrow. Time flies. Dad. Friday, 7:52 p. Hard to believe it's been 4 years. Worth every penny. The worth every penny comment sat in my chest like a stone. They'd never let me forget the cost, never let me enjoy a single achievement without the reminder of their financial sacrifice. Ethan. Friday, 8:15 p.m. Don't forget to bring the camera. Dad, we'll want pictures. Mom. Friday, 8:18 p.m. Already packed, and I made dinner reservations at that steakhouse on Lane Avenue for after 6:30. I'd stared at that message for 10 minutes before typing, "What time should I meet you guys?" The response took 20 minutes. Mom. Friday, 8:38 p.m. Oh, honey, the reservation is just for 4. We figured you'd want to celebrate with your friends. 4, Mom, Dad, Ethan, and his girlfriend Jessica, a sweet girl who worked at the bank and treated my brother like he'd invented oxygen. No seat for the graduate. I'd deleted my response 3 times before settling on, "Sounds good. See you at the ceremony." Now, sitting in my apartment as the sun climbed higher, I reread those messages and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Today wasn't about me. It had never been about me. I was just the expensive obligation they needed to check off their list. My phone buzzed with a new message. Ethan. Today, 6:45 a.m. Remember to bring the camera. Dad. Quick pics, then we can get out of there. Long day ahead. Quick pics. Get out of there. Like my graduation was a dental appointment they needed to endure. I set my phone aside and walked to my closet, a corner space barely big enough for my few dresses and work uniforms. Behind my clothes, in a shoebox I'd never opened in their presence. I kept the things that mattered. Letters from Dr. Mitchell about my research, screenshots of my perfect GPA, acceptance emails I'd printed and folded carefully, and one letter I'd received 3 weeks ago that would change everything. I pulled out my graduation dress, a simple navy blue sheath I'd bought at a consignment shop for $15. It was professional, modest, and completely forgettable. Perfect for someone who'd spent 4 years being invisible. As I got ready, I thought about the thousands of mornings I'd woken up in this apartment, rushing to class or work or the lab, surviving on determination and spite. I thought about the nights I'd fallen asleep over textbooks, my face pressed against pages of molecular biology while my family went to dinner without me. I thought about every "it's just expensive," and hopefully this will all be worth it someday, and we're really stretching ourselves here. Today, they'd find out if it was worth it. I slipped on the dress and looked at myself in the small mirror propped against my wall. 24 years old, tired eyes, hands still bearing tiny scars from lab work and waitressing. I looked exactly like what they thought I was, their unremarkable daughter who'd finally finished her expensive education so they could stop hemorrhaging money. They had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed again. Mom. Today, 7:15 a.m. Heading to campus soon. So excited. This is such a special day. Special for whom I wanted to ask. But instead, I grabbed my cap and gown and headed for the door. The walk to campus was only 12 minutes, but it felt like a pilgrimage. I passed the diner where Mrs. Patterson had taught me that hard work was its own reward, the biology building where I'd spent countless hours proving I belonged, the library where I'd written papers that professors called graduate-level work. Ohio State's campus buzzed with families and graduates. Parents carried flowers and balloons. Siblings wore school colors. Grandparents shuffled along with cameras and proud smiles. Everyone looked like they belonged to someone, like they were celebrating something that mattered. I found my family in the designated meeting area outside the Jerome Schottenstein Center. They stood in a tight cluster, Mom in her best dress, Dad in a suit that was slightly too small, Ethan looking bored in khakis and a polo, Jessica smiling nervously beside him. "There she is," Mom called, waving like I might miss them in the crowd. I walked over, and she pulled me into a hug that felt more like a photo opportunity than affection. "You look nice, honey," she said, already stepping back to examine me. "Very professional." "Thanks." I adjusted my cap, which kept sliding on my hair. Dad clapped me on the shoulder. "Big day. Rachel. 4 years of hard work coming to an end. 4 years of hard work, like it was finally over, like graduation was the finish line instead of the starting gate. "Actually," I began, but Ethan interrupted. "Oh, how long is this thing supposed to take? Jess and I have plans tonight." Jessica elbowed him gently. It's your sister's graduation. Ethan. I know. I'm just saying, these ceremonies drag on forever. Same speeches, same boring stuff. Mom looked apologetic. We're all excited to be here. Rachel, it's just been a long week for everyone. A long week. My graduation was an inconvenience in their long week. I smiled, the same smile I'd perfected over 24 years of being the wrong child. Don't worry, it'll be over soon. Dad checked his watch. Good. The sooner we can get those pictures and head to dinner, the better. Pictures without me, dinner without me, celebration without me. Perfect. Because what was about to happen inside that auditorium would rewrite every assumption they'd ever made about their expensive, unremarkable, forgettable daughter. They thought today was about ending their investment in me. They had no idea it was about to become the most important day of their lives. The Jerome Schottenstein Center had been transformed into a cathedral of achievement. Red and gray banners hung from the rafters, and the massive stage gleamed under professional lighting that made everything look like a movie set. Thousands of folding chairs stretched across the arena floor in perfect rows, while the bleachers above buzzed with families clutching programs and flowers. I found my assigned seat in the sea of black caps and gowns, somewhere in the middle of the biology graduates. Around me, my classmates chattered nervously, adjusting their tassels and checking their phones for family photos. Sarah Martinez, who'd been in my organic chemistry study group, leaned over with a grin. "Can you believe we actually made it?" she whispered. I nodded, but my throat felt too tight to speak. Made it through 4 years of being treated like a financial burden, 4 years of proving myself to people who refused to see. From my seat, I could barely make out my family in the bleachers. They sat in a tight cluster about halfway up, Dad already looking at his watch despite the ceremony not starting for another 20 minutes. Mom was taking pictures of the stage with her phone, probably for Facebook. Ethan had his arms crossed, slouched in his seat like a teenager forced to attend church. The contrast with the families around them was stark. To my left, the Rodriguez family took up an entire row, 3 generations wearing matching Proud of Miguel t-shirts and waving homemade signs. Behind them, the Johnsons had brought what looked like half of Cincinnati to cheer for their daughter, complete with balloons and a banner that read, "Dr. Johnson in the making." My family looked like they were waiting for a delayed flight. The processional music began, and we rose as one massive wave of black robes. Faculty members filed onto the stage in their colorful academic regalia, followed by university administrators and distinguished guests. Dean Patricia Holbrook took her place at the podium, her silver hair catching the stage lights as she smiled out at the crowd. "Wow, welcome, families, friends, and most importantly, graduates of Ohio State University's class of 2024. The auditorium exploded in cheers and applause. Air horns blared from the bleachers, and someone in the back started chanting OH, which was immediately answered by thunderous IO responses throughout the arena. I clapped politely, my hands feeling mechanical. Around me, my classmates whooped and cheered, some crying happy tears, others taking selfies with their phones. The energy was infectious, joyful, celebratory. I felt like I was watching it all through glass. Dean Holbrook began the standard graduation address, something about new beginnings and bright futures and the power of education to change the world. I'd heard variations of this speech at high school graduation, at scholarship ceremonies, at academic awards banquets. The words washed over me like white noise. Instead, I found myself studying my family again. Dad had his phone out now, probably checking work emails. Mom was still taking pictures, but of the general ceremony rather than focusing on where I sat. Ethan appeared to be asleep. Then I heard it. It was faint, carried on the acoustics of the arena, but unmistakable. Dad leaning over to Mom, his voice just loud enough to reach the people around them. "Finally done wasting my money on this." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold, then hot again. My hands clenched in my lap. crumpling the program I'd been holding. Finally done wasting my money. Not, I'm proud of what she's accomplished, or 4 years of hard work paid off, or even, I'm glad she followed her dreams. Wasted money. That's what I was to him. 4 years, $60,000 in tuition payments, countless dinner conversations about stretching the budget and making sacrifices, all of it just money thrown into a void. I looked around to see if anyone else had heard, but the families near them seemed focused on their own graduates. Mom had nodded along with whatever Dad said, her expression sympathetic rather than shocked. This wasn't news to her. This was their shared opinion, probably discussed privately many times. Their expensive mistake was finally graduating. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped bands around my ribs and was slowly tightening them. 4 years of perfect grades, of research that could change lives, of working 3 jobs to minimize their burden, and I was still just wasted money. Dean Holbrook was transitioning into the awards portion of the ceremony now, talking about students who had distinguished themselves through exceptional academic achievement and service to the university. I tried to focus on her words, but Dad's comment kept echoing in my head. Wasted money. Wasted money. Finally done wasting my money. We are particularly proud, Dean Holbrook continued, to recognize students whose research contributions have already begun making an impact in their fields. These young scholars represent the very best of what Ohio State University stands for: intellectual curiosity, scientific rigor, and the determination to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Around me, graduates began looking around curiously. Awards ceremonies usually meant a few standout students would be called to the stage for special recognition. Parents in the bleachers leaned forward, hoping to hear their child's name. My family remained slouched in their seats, probably calculating how much longer until they could leave for their dinner reservation. This year's recipient of the Outstanding Undergraduate Research Award in the Biological Sciences has maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while conducting groundbreaking research in synaptic plasticity and neurodegeneration. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. There were dozens of biology students graduating today. Plenty of them had good grades and research experience. Her work on amyloid protein aggregation has already resulted in 2 peer-reviewed publications and has been selected for presentation at the International Conference on Neuroscience this fall. My mouth went dry. 2 publications. International conference. Only 1 person fit that description. Additionally, this exceptional student has been awarded a full MD-PhD scholarship to Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, one of the most prestigious programs in the country. The arena started to blur around the edges. This was happening. This was actually happening. Please join me in congratulating Rachel Monroe for her outstanding contributions to undergraduate research and her bright future in medicine and neuroscience. My name echoed through the arena's sound system, amplified and crystal clear. 20,000 people heard it, including my family. Including my father, who had just told everyone around him that I was wasted money. The spotlight found me in the sea of graduates, and suddenly I was standing, my legs moving without conscious thought. Around me, my classmates erupted in applause, some reaching out to pat my shoulders as I made my way toward the aisle. But all I could think about, as I walked toward that stage under those blinding lights, was the look that must be on my father's face right now. The man who thought he'd finally stopped wasting money on me was about to learn exactly what his investment had bought. The walk to the stage felt both eternal and instantaneous, like moving through water while the world held its breath around me. Each step echoed in my ears above the thunderous applause that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The spotlight followed me, a blazing circle of white light that made everything beyond its edges disappear into shadow. I climbed the steps to the stage, my legs steady despite the tremor in my hands. Dean Holbrook stood waiting at the podium, her smile warm and genuine as she extended her hand to me. Behind her, the university president and other faculty members rose from their chairs, adding their applause to the roar from the audience. "Rachel, Dean Holbrook said, her voice carrying through the microphone as she shook my hand. Congratulations on this extraordinary achievement. I managed to say thank you, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from someone else entirely. The dean gestured for me to stand beside her at the podium, and suddenly I was facing out at an ocean of people, 20,000 faces looking up at me, cameras flashing like stars. Somewhere in that crowd was my family. I couldn't see them through the glare of the stage lights, but I knew they were there. Dad, who had just whispered about wasted money. Mom, who had made dinner reservations for everyone except me. Ethan, who thought my achievements were just participation trophies. They were all staring up at me now, probably wondering how the expensive mistake had ended up on stage. Dean Holbrook turned back to the microphone, and the applause gradually died down to an expectant hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and strong, "it is my great pleasure to share with you the remarkable achievements of this year's Outstanding Research Award recipient." She paused, looking down at her notes, then back out at the audience. Rachel Monroe has spent the past 4 years redefining what it means to be an undergraduate researcher, while maintaining a perfect 4.0 grade point average across 132 credit hours. She has simultaneously conducted research that many graduate students would envy. The words washed over me like waves. Perfect GPA, 132 credit hours. I had pushed myself beyond every limit, taking extra classes, summer sessions, overloading every semester to graduate summa cum laude in 4 years instead of 5. Her research on synaptic plasticity in neurodegenerative diseases has already resulted in 2 first-author publications in peer-reviewed journals, including the prestigious Journal of Neurochemistry. More applause rippled through the audience. I could hear individual voices, now professors from the biology department, classmates who knew about my research, even some of the diner customers who had watched me study during slow nights at Tony's. But perhaps most impressive, Dean Holbrook continued, is that Rachel accomplished all of this while working multiple jobs to support herself financially. She has served as a teaching assistant, a research assistant, and has maintained part-time employment throughout her entire undergraduate career. The arena fell completely silent. This wasn't the typical graduation speech about academic achievement. This was something else entirely. Rachel's dedication to both academic excellence and financial independence demonstrates a level of maturity and determination that is truly exceptional. She has never asked for special consideration or extensions, despite balancing a workload that would overwhelm most students. I felt tears starting to form behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. Not here. Not now. This moment was too important to blur with emotion. "Oh, which brings me to the most exciting news of all," Dean Holbrook said, her voice rising with genuine enthusiasm. Rachel has been selected for one of the most competitive graduate programs in the country, a full MD-PhD scholarship at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. The applause exploded again, but Dean Holbrook raised her hand for quiet. "Let me be clear about what this means," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is not just any scholarship. This is a full fellowship covering 8 years of medical school and graduate school, including tuition, living expenses, health insurance, and research funding. The total value exceeds $400,000. $400,000. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Rachel will be studying in one of the most prestigious neuroscience programs in the world, working alongside Nobel laureates and leading researchers in the field of neurodegeneration. She will graduate as both a medical doctor and a PhD scientist, prepared to lead the next generation of breakthrough treatments for diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. The applause was deafening now, but I barely heard it. All I could think about was that number $400,000, more than 6 times what my parents had spent on my undergraduate education, more money than my father made in 8 years at his job. The expensive mistake had just become the most valuable investment they'd ever made. Furthermore, Dean Holbrook continued, Rachel's research mentor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, has informed me that Rachel's undergraduate work has already been selected for presentation at the International Conference on Neuroscience in Geneva this October. She will be the youngest presenter in the conference's 50-year history. Geneva. International Conference. Youngest presenter in 50 years. I thought about Ethan's Employee of the Month award at the auto parts store, the award they were celebrating with dinner at Olive Garden tonight. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Rachel Monroe represents everything we hope to achieve at Ohio State University, Dean Holbrook said, her voice filled with pride. She is a scholar, a researcher, a leader, and an inspiration. She has proven that with determination, hard work, and intellectual curiosity, there are no limits to what our students can accomplish. She turned to me, holding out a plaque that caught the stage lights and gleamed like gold. Congratulations! Rachel, we are extraordinarily proud of you, and we cannot wait to see what you accomplish next. I took the award, its weight solid and real in my hands. The applause washed over me again, and this time I let myself really hear it. 20,000 people were on their feet, cheering for me, for the girl who waited tables and lived in a studio apartment and wore a $15 dress to her graduation, for the girl whose father had just called her wasted money. I looked out into the crowd, and even though I couldn't see their faces through the lights, I knew my family was out there somewhere. They had come here expecting to take quick pictures of their expensive burden finally finishing college. Instead, they had just watched me receive the highest honor the university could bestow, learned about achievements they never knew existed, and discovered that their failed investment had just been handed nearly $500,000 to become a doctor and a scientist. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart hammering but my voice steady. "Thank you," I said simply, and my words echoed through the arena. "This is just the beginning." As I walked off the stage, award in hand, I realized that everything had changed, not just for me, but for them too. They would never be able to call me wasted money again. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of names and handshakes, but I felt every second with crystalline clarity. I sat in my chair, the award heavy in my lap, while hundreds of my classmates crossed the stage to receive their diplomas. The weight of what had just happened settled over me like a warm blanket, protective and comforting. When my name was called again for my actual diploma, the applause was noticeably louder than for other graduates. Word had spread through the audience this was the girl who had just received the most prestigious award of the day. As I shook President Hayes's hand and accepted my degree, he leaned in close. "Extraordinary work, Rachel. Johns Hopkins is lucky to have you." I smiled, genuinely this time. "Thank you, sir." Walking back to my seat, I caught sight of Dr. Mitchell in the faculty section. She was beaming, her usually serious expression transformed by pride. She had been the first person to believe in my potential, the first to see past the tired girl in second-hand clothes to the scientist underneath. She nodded at me, just once, but it carried the weight of 4 years of mentorship and support. As the ceremony concluded and the traditional cap-tossing began, I stayed seated for a moment, watching hundreds of mortarboards fly into the air like black birds against the arena lights. My classmates hugged and cried and laughed. Families poured onto the floor from the bleachers, and chaos erupted in the most beautiful way. I knew I needed to find my family, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed a few more seconds to savor this moment before reality crashed back in. But reality found me anyway. "Rachel, Rachel, there you are." Mom's voice cut through the crowd, and I turned to see them pushing through the mass of people on the arena floor. Dad's face was flushed, whether from excitement or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Mom looked frantic, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Ethan trailed behind them, his expression unreadable, with Jessica clinging to his arm and looking around nervously. "Honey, we've been looking everywhere for you." Mom reached me first, pulling me into a hug that felt different from the perfunctory one this morning. Tighter, more desperate. "I was just sitting here," I said, my voice carefully neutral. Dad approached more slowly, his eyes darting between my face and the award still clutched in my hand. Rachel, we had no idea about any of this. No idea about what I asked, though we both knew exactly what he meant. The research, the scholarship, he gestured vaguely at the plaque. Johns Hopkins Medical School. When did all this happen? I looked at him steadily. Over the past 4 years, Dad, while you were paying for my education. The barb hit its mark. His face reddened, and he glanced around to see if anyone was listening. But the arena was too chaotic for anyone to pay attention to our little family drama. We're so proud of you. Mom jumped in, her voice artificially bright. Aren't we, David? So incredibly proud. Of course we are, Dad said quickly. It's just, you never told us about the scholarship, or the research. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't I say anything? The question hung between us like smoke, because every time I tried to share good news, it was dismissed as participation trophies and expensive hobbies, because my achievements were always overshadowed by concern about cost, because I learned early that my family wasn't interested in celebrating me. They were only interested in when the bill would finally be paid in full. I wanted it to be a surprise, I said instead, my voice sweet as honey with just a hint of acid underneath. Ethan finally spoke up. So you're going to be a doctor, like a real doctor? A medical doctor and a PhD, I corrected. 8 years of study at Johns Hopkins, one of the top programs in the world. 8 more years! Dad's voice cracked slightly. But the scholarship covers everything. Everything, I confirmed. Tuition, living expenses, research funding, health insurance, $400,000, like Dean Holbrook said. The number still had the power to stop conversation. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Even Jessica looked impressed, though she probably had no idea what Johns Hopkins meant. 400,000, Dad repeated slowly. That's more than I make in 8 years, I finished. Yes, I know. The math was simple and devastating. They had spent roughly $60,000 on my undergraduate education and complained about it constantly. Someone else had just handed me nearly $500,000 and called it an investment in my future. Rachel, Mom said, her voice suddenly emotional. Why didn't you tell us you were applying for this? We could have helped, could have supported you through the process. Supported me? I almost laughed. When exactly would you have supported me? Mom, between telling me how expensive I was or making dinner reservations without including me. The accusation hit the air like a slap. Mom's face crumpled, and Dad looked stricken. That's not fair, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I turned to face him fully. When's the last time any of you asked about my grades, my research, my plans after graduation? When's the last time you celebrated something I accomplished without immediately talking about the cost? They stood there in silence, surrounded by the joyful chaos of families celebrating their graduates. Around us, parents lifted children onto their shoulders, grandparents wiped away tears of pride, siblings took endless photos. We looked like a family in crisis. We're proud of you, Dad said finally, his voice quiet. We've always been proud of you. No, I said, shaking my head. You've been proud of my grades because they justified your investment. You've been proud that I worked jobs because it reduced your expenses. But you've never been proud of me as a person. You've never celebrated my dreams or supported my ambitions or even bothered to learn what I was working toward. That's not true, Mom protested, tears starting to form in her eyes. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat. Look at this. Look at our messages from the past month. Count how many times you've asked about my research, my graduation plans, my future. Count how many times you've mentioned Ethan's job, his girlfriend, his achievements. The ratio might surprise you. They didn't need to count. We all knew what they'd find. Rachel, Dad said, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. We didn't know. We didn't realize. You didn't bother to know, I corrected. There's a difference. I looked at each of them in turn, Dad with his guilty expression, Mom with her tears, Ethan with his uncomfortable silence, Jessica with her obvious desire to be anywhere else. I've spent 4 years proving myself to people who refused to see what was right in front of them. I've worked 3 jobs, maintained perfect grades, conducted groundbreaking research, and earned one of the most competitive scholarships in the country. And 30 minutes ago, Dad, you told half the bleacher section that you were finally done wasting money on me. Dad's face went white. You heard that? The whole arena has excellent acoustics, I said. But don't worry. I'm sure they also heard Dean Holbrook explain exactly what your money bought you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. Around us, the celebration continued, but our little family bubble felt frozen in time. Finally, I stood up, clutching my diploma and award. The irony is, I said, my voice clear and steady, you actually did invest in something valuable. You just never bothered to check on your returns. The confrontation had drawn a small crowd. I could see other families nearby pretending not to listen while clearly absorbing every word of our exchange. Graduate students I recognized from the biology department lingered at the edges, some recording the aftermath on their phones. Word was already spreading through social media. The girl who won the research award was having a public breakdown with her family. Perfect. Rachel, please, Mom said, reaching for my arm. Let's go somewhere private and talk about this. Private. I stepped back, keeping my voice level but loud enough for our audience to hear. Why would we want privacy now? You've never been private about your disappointment in me before. A woman nearby, I recognized her as Dr. Peterson from the chemistry department, turned fully toward us, no longer pretending to mind her own business. Her eyebrows were raised in the universal expression of academic gossip being received in real time. Dad noticed the attention too. His face reddened as he glanced around at the growing circle of observers. Rachel, this isn't the place. Actually, this is exactly the place. I interrupted. This is my graduation, surrounded by my professors, my classmates, and their families. These are the people who supported me, who believed in my potential, who celebrated my achievements. They deserve to know what kind of support system I had at home. Dr. Rodriguez, my former teaching supervisor, had materialized nearby with his own family. He caught my eye and nodded slightly, his expression understanding. He'd seen me grading papers at 3A, exhausted from my waitressing shift, but determined to give his students proper feedback. He knew exactly how hard I'd worked. You're embarrassing us, Ethan hissed, finally finding his voice. I'm embarrassing you, I laughed, and the sound carried across the arena floor. Ethan, you're 28 years old, living in your childhood bedroom, working at an auto parts store, and dating the same girl for 6 years without any sign of commitment or ambition. But I'm the embarrassment. Jessica's face went bright red, and she took a step behind Ethan. I felt a momentary pang of guilt. She was sweet and didn't deserve to be collateral damage. But then I remembered all the family dinners she'd attended while I worked doubles at the diner, all the birthday celebrations I'd missed because I couldn't afford to take time off. That's enough, Dad said, his voice sharp with authority. We're your family. Rachel, we deserve better than this public humiliation. Deserve better. The words came out louder than I intended, carrying across the arena floor like a thunderclap. You deserve better. What exactly do you think you deserve? Dad. More heads turned our way. I could see Dr. Mitchell approaching from across the arena, her expression concerned but curious. Mrs. Patterson from the diner was there too, having come to watch her favorite student graduate. Even some of my classmates had stopped their own family celebrations to watch the drama unfold. Good. Let them all hear this. Do you deserve a daughter who maintains perfect grades while working 3 jobs to minimize your financial burden? I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Do you deserve a daughter who never asks for help, never complains about being excluded from family dinners, never demands recognition for her achievements. We never excluded you, Mom protested weakly. Tonight's dinner reservation says otherwise. I shot back. 4 seats for 4 people. Everyone except the graduate. A murmur rippled through our audience. The casual cruelty of it was obvious to everyone listening, and I could see the judgment in their faces as they looked at my parents. You want to know what you deserved? I asked, my voice carrying the weight of 24 years of accumulated hurt. You deserved a daughter who gave up, who accepted your low expectations, who stayed small and unremarkable so you could feel better about your investment. You deserved exactly what you expected from me, nothing. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Instead, I continued, ignoring his weak protest, you got a daughter who will be Dr. Rachel Monroe twice over by the time she's 30. You got a daughter whose research will help cure diseases that devastate families. You got a daughter who just received a scholarship worth more than your house. The crowd around us had grown larger. I could see phone cameras pointed in our direction, capturing this moment for posterity. By tomorrow, this would be all over social media. The graduation confrontation that revealed everything about family dynamics and support systems. But most importantly, I said, looking directly at each of them in turn, you got a daughter who learned that she didn't need your approval or recognition to succeed. You taught me that love is conditional, that support has a price tag, and that family means nothing if it's not backed up by genuine care and respect. We do care about you, Mom said through her tears. We love you. No, I replied firmly. You love the idea of having a successful daughter now that you know I am one. You love being able to brag about Johns Hopkins and $400,000. You love the reflected glory and the Facebook posts you'll make about your amazing child. I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. But you never loved me when I was just Rachel, the girl who needed support, encouragement, and belief in her potential. You never loved me when loving me required effort instead of just expense. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient noise of the arena seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Dr. Mitchell reached us then, her presence commanding immediate attention. Rachel, she said warmly, I've been looking for you. The neuroscience department is hosting a reception for our graduating researchers. Several faculty members from Johns Hopkins are here and would like to meet you. She looked pointedly at my family, her expression polite but clearly dismissive. Dr. Mitchell had no patience for people who didn't recognize talent when it was right in front of them. That sounds wonderful, I said, my voice suddenly bright and professional. I'd love to meet them. Excellent. They're particularly interested in discussing your amyloid research and its implications for early-stage interventions. She turned to my family with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. You must be very proud of Rachel's achievements. The question hung in the air like a challenge. My family stood there, surrounded by witnesses to their years of neglect and dismissal, faced with a professor who clearly knew exactly what kind of support system I'd had. We are, Dad managed to say, very proud. I'm sure, Dr. Mitchell replied dryly. Well, Rachel, shall we go? Your future colleagues are waiting. I looked at my family one last time, Dad with his guilty expression, Mom with her tears, Ethan with his shame, Jessica with her obvious discomfort. Enjoy your dinner, I said simply. All 4 of you. And then I walked away, my cap and gown flowing behind me like royal robes, my award catching the arena lights as I moved toward a future they'd never bothered to imagine. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of conversation as our audience discussed what they'd just witnessed. Some would call it harsh, others would call it justice. I called it freedom. The neuroscience department reception was everything I had imagined academic success would feel like, held in the faculty lounge overlooking the campus quad. The room buzzed with intelligent conversation and genuine celebration. Professors from Johns Hopkins mingled with Ohio State faculty, discussing research breakthroughs and future collaborations over wine and carefully arranged appetizers. Dr. Catherine Walsh from Johns Hopkins approached me with a warm smile, her silver hair elegant in the late afternoon light streaming through tall windows. "Rachel Monroe," she said, extending her hand. "I've been following your research on synaptic plasticity. Brilliant work for an undergraduate." "Thank you, Dr. Walsh. I'm honored to be joining your program." "The honor is ours," she replied. "Your publications show remarkable insight into protein aggregation mechanisms. We're excited to see what you'll accomplish with our resources at your disposal." As she spoke about the opportunities awaiting me at Johns Hopkins' state-of-the-art labs, renowned faculty mentors, collaboration with pharmaceutical companies, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. This was what recognition felt like. This was what it meant to be valued for your mind, your potential, your contributions to human knowledge. Dr. Mitchell appeared at my elbow with a plate of food. "You need to eat something," she said quietly. "It's been a big day." I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous and then too overwhelmed to think about food. The simple gesture of care from my mentor meant more than any family dinner reservation ever could. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying my face with the same intensity she brought to microscope observations. "Free," I said without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." She nodded approvingly. "Good. That's exactly how you should feel." Through the tall windows, I could see the campus quad where families were still taking photos, graduates hugging friends, and the normal celebration of achievement continuing. Somewhere out there, my family was probably sitting in awkward silence, processing what had just happened. My phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from classmates who had witnessed the confrontation, social media tags from people who had recorded parts of it, missed calls from relatives who had undoubtedly heard the news through family networks. I ignored them all. Dr. Rodriguez from the biology department joined our small group, raising his wine glass. "A toast," he announced, "to Rachel Monroe, who just proved that the best revenge is living well, very, very well." The faculty members around us laughed and raised their glasses. "To Rachel," they chorused. As I sipped my wine, I thought about the girl who had woken up this morning in a studio apartment, nervous about graduation and dreading family dinner. That girl had thought today was an ending the conclusion of an expensive education that had strained family relationships and confirmed her status as a burden. She had no idea it was actually the beginning of everything. "Rachel," Dr. Walsh said, checking her watch, "my colleagues and I are having dinner downtown. Would you like to join us? We'd love to discuss your research interests in more detail." A dinner invitation, extended with genuine enthusiasm, with no concern about cost or convenience, with actual interest in my thoughts and contributions. "I would love that," I said. As we gathered our things to leave, Dr. Mitchell pulled me aside. "You know," she said quietly, "what happened today with your family that took courage, standing up for yourself, demanding the respect you've earned. Not everyone can do that." "It needed to be done," I replied. "I couldn't start my career carrying their limitations with me." "No," she agreed. "You couldn't. And now you don't have to." We walked out of the reception together, a group of accomplished scientists discussing research methods and career trajectories. As we crossed the quad, I caught sight of my family's car pulling out of the parking lot. Dad was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Mom sat in the passenger seat, probably still crying. Ethan and Jessica were in the back, undoubtedly uncomfortable and eager to escape the tension. They were going to their dinner without me, just as planned. The only difference was that now they knew exactly what they were missing. I didn't wave. 6 months later, I would receive a letter from Dad, a stilted attempted apology that mentioned pride and misunderstanding and hope for reconciliation. I would read it once and file it away unanswered. Some bridges, once burned, are not meant to be rebuilt. A year later, Ethan would finally propose to Jessica at a family barbecue I wasn't invited to. The Facebook photos would show him presenting a modest diamond ring while my parents beamed in the background. The comments would be full of congratulations and heart emojis. No one would mention the daughter who was by then publishing research that made national news. 2 years later, when my first major breakthrough in Alzheimer's research was featured on the cover of Nature Medicine, Mom would share the article on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our brilliant daughter." She would receive hundreds of likes and comments about having raised such an accomplished child. I would see it through mutual friends and feel nothing but mild amusement at the irony. But that day, walking across campus toward a dinner where I would be celebrated for my mind rather than mourned as an expense, I thought only about the future. Johns Hopkins awaited. Groundbreaking research beckoned. A career in medicine and science stretched ahead of me like an open road. The girl they had called wasted money was about to change the world. And the most beautiful part was that they would spend the rest of their lives knowing they had been too blind to see it coming. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't violence or cruelty, it's becoming so successful that your absence becomes their greatest loss. Thank you so much for listening to Rachel's story of triumph and transformation. If you're hearing this from your car during your commute, your cozy living room, or maybe while taking a walk through your neighborhood, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on this revenge story. Did Rachel handle her family confrontation the right way? Have you ever experienced being underestimated by the people closest to you? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments. I read every single one and love connecting with listeners from around the globe.